Ladies and gentlemen, the legal system and the judiciary in the United Kingdom is a facade. More often than not, you cannot get justice unless you got plenty of money to buy the court. It is little wonder, therefore, ladies and gentlemen, the poor suffers the most injustice, because it is not the law, but your finances that determines whether or not you get justice more often than not here at the United Kingdom. You cannot criminally prosecute judges when they act in the interest of the Crown. However, ladies and gentlemen, if those judges and police constables are acting outside of the constitutional fold of government, ladies and gentlemen, then that is anarchy. And a criminal prosecution should be justifiable against the individual. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the reasons why it is imperative that the public understands the issues at law when dealing with these public authorities. Now, don't waste your time relying upon solicitors or barristers to inform you of this information, ladies and gentlemen, because they do not do so. And more often than not, even they don't know. In any case, ladies and gentlemen, it's a wonder why we still need solicitors to represent us in court. Isn't it about time we have an efficient justice system? Because it's unacceptable that you have to rely upon someone who spends hundreds and hundreds of pounds to go to university to get a qualification in order to come and explain to you law that you should understand in the first instance. Otherwise, it is not fair if they are creating laws that you do not understand and you need someone to interpret it to you. Now, the United Kingdom is the Jacobite Union. The flag that flies over these kingdoms is called the Jacobite Union flag. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there is no Jacobite or their descendants on the throne of this Jacobite Union. The throne of the United Kingdom is vacant. Vacant, ladies and gentlemen. The person calling himself by title, ladies and gentlemen, by title, not bloodline, title, calling himself King Charles III is not a descendant of King Charles I or King Charles II. He's not a bloodline descendant. King Charles, calling himself King Charles III, is from Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, from the House of Witten, a German tribe. We say that to say this: jurisdiction is the first issue in law when dealing with any public official here in the United Kingdom. So the question is, where does Parliament derive their authority? Where does Parliament derive their authority? If someone regulates our freedoms of movement, that is slavery. If someone regulates our freedom of movement, that is a form of slavery. Ladies and gentlemen, the fraud of granting someone a privilege, such as a driver's license, in nature, is our right to act, is a form of slavery, and it is a fraud by inducement. Ladies and gentlemen, how did our rights to travel get classified as a property of DVLA, a private corporation, in the form of a driver's license. By implication, it is sold to us that we then breach, and then they accuse us of committing an offence under a statutory instrument called the Road Traffic Act, where the offence is not categorized or classified. Ladies and gentlemen, do you understand? In other words, ladies and gentlemen, why do you need a driver's license? Members of the public should only be paid to be taught how to drive. And once they have reached a level of competence, the organization should supply a certificate of qualification. And it is that certificate of qualification that ought to be produced to demonstrate competence of operating a motor vehicle. But instead, ladies and gentlemen, our right to travel is classified as a property of DVLA. And as a result, our freedom of movement is regulated. Let's make one thing absolutely clear. It is a well-established custom of this realm that this is a common law jurisdiction. A common law jurisdiction. In any circumstances, when a public official first makes contact with any citizen in this United Kingdom, the first issue in law is jurisdiction, ladies and gentlemen. Jurisdiction. And this realm is a common law jurisdiction. Not statutory law, ladies and gentlemen, common law. And we are the common people. Look, ladies and gentlemen, statutory instruments or law does not apply to citizens of this realm unless the statute classifies the common law jurisdiction offence. So, when a police constable stops a motor vehicle, ladies and gentlemen, it's imperative that you pay attention to what we are about to state. And we would like to make it absolutely clear that this is not about getting out of parking tickets or driving without a license or insurance. Because under common law jurisdiction, it is an offence. What we are saying, ladies and gentlemen, is that whenever a police constable stops a motor vehicle, and therefore, for the record, he states he's a police officer that is requiring your driver's license and insurance documents under the Road Traffic Act, and states to you, if you do not supply those documents, you are committing an offence under the Road Traffic Act. That police constable, in ignorance of the law, is unconstitutional, unlawful, and committing fraud. The failure of government to distinguish between statutory and common law is incompetence and fraud. This realm is common law jurisdiction, not statute law, common law jurisdiction. And in common law, there are two categories of law, criminal and civil. Now, we would like to make it absolutely clear once more that the Moorish Society is not encouraging anyone to drive a motor vehicle that is not competent to operate that motor vehicle, or to drive without insurance, ladies and gentlemen. That is not what we are saying. Because under common law, it is an offence. What we are saying, ladies and gentlemen, is that the police constable is unconstitutional and unlawful because he's enforcing a statutory instrument called the Road Traffic Act, not law. He's not enforcing law, ladies and gentlemen. When a police constable stops any one of us members of the public and demands that we provide them with a license, and you fail to provide such license, and that police constable states it is an offence under the Road Traffic Act not to provide your license, the question is, what law are you in violation of? Is it criminal or civil? The failure of that constable to classify or categorize the common law jurisdiction of law that you are in violation of, ladies and gentlemen, that is incompetence, unconstitutional, and fraud, because he's not enforcing law within a common law jurisdiction. He is enforcing a statutory instrument called the Road Traffic Act. Unfortunately, it is not law that makes us comply with the request of a police constable pretending to be a police officer. No, ladies and gentlemen, because what does the police do if you do not comply? He gets violent. He starts to destroy your property to get access to you. And then he drags you out the car and places you under arrest. Police constables have a duty of care to citizens of this realm, to protect their property, to prevent breach of the peace, and uphold their fundamental human rights. Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, we have seen the YouTube videos and TikTok videos of police constables in flagrant violation of their constitutional duty of care to citizens of this realm. Instead of preventing breach of the peace, they themselves breach the peace by becoming violent with the citizen. Instead of protecting the property, they breach their constitutional oath by damaging the property of the citizen. And then, ladies and gentlemen, they take that person out of their property and place them in handcuffs, detaining them under arrest. And what for, ladies and gentlemen? Are they enforcing law? No. Statutory instruments. Ladies and gentlemen, this is anarchy. Anarchy, not law. Because the constable cannot answer the question to classify the common law jurisdiction of law which you are in violation of. Because he cannot answer the question, because to do so would expose the fraud. He uses the only thing he has left in his arsenal, which is violence, ladies and gentlemen. In summary, ladies and gentlemen, these people have taken your God-given right to freely travel by any means to wherever you want to travel to. They have regulated it, sold it to you in the form of a driver's license, and then demand you provide it to them. And if you don't, they tell you you are committing an offence under what is a commercial statutory instrument called the Road Traffic Act. The failure of government to distinguish between statutory and common law is incompetence, unconstitutional, unlawful, and fraudulent. Ladies and gentlemen, your government and parliament in the United Kingdom are unconstitutional and de facto. They started this, ladies and gentlemen. I have been attacked in my own home, my children removed for no reason, injuring them. One has been abducted, my property stolen, and £365,000 stolen by the judiciary, police, children's services and lawyers, and then were denied access to justice for remedy. No laws have been broken, and I have not wronged anyone. So explain what that means. Explain what it means. When senior High Court racist Jewish judge tell you they are prepared to break the law, then carry out 16 years of racist violence using state powers and denying you access to justice and remedy to suppress their criminal acts. What is that? It is anarchy, racist anarchy and tyranny. Men fought for this United Kingdom to be free, and their children poison it with rainbow racist diversity ideology and other forms of racism. Remembrance Day is around the corner. This is how we honor the dead. The facade the United Kingdom has become, ladies and gentlemen. Year after year, it's the same politics in Parliament. Political party and partisan interests served, and the people's interests matter only to achieve party political goals in the form of statutes. Man has no right or authority to make laws over any other man, binding us to laws where only the few benefits. Government role in Parliament is to secure our pre-existing rights, customs and law, not infringement of them. So if these people want to talk about reform, I suggest they start with government and Parliament and any other public or private body that interferes with the rights of the citizens of this realm. Ladies and gentlemen, we are the Moorish society.